Conversation with AI Part 2. Explain the slaves that were taken from Spain and brought to America under Ferdinand and Isabella. During the 15th century, the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, initiated the colonization of the Americas, which involved the enslavement of indigenous peoples from the islands and mainland of the Caribbean and the enslavement of Africans who were taken from various regions of Africa and brought to the Americas to work as slaves. However, there is no evidence to suggest that Ferdinand and Isabella themselves ordered the enslavement of people from Spain and that those slaves were brought to the Americas. The enslavement of people from Spain or their descendants would have been prohibited by Spanish law and represents a deviation from the norm. It should be noted that during the same time period, the Spanish Inquisition expelled Jews and Muslims from Spain and confiscated their property. It should be noted that during that same time period, the Spanish Inquisition expelled Jews and Muslims from Spain and confiscated their property. It is possible that some of these exiles or their descendants were later captured and enslaved by other Europeans. However, this would have been due to the policies and practices of other European countries rather than those of Ferdinand and Isabella themselves. There are old books, my response, there are old books that describe slaves taken from Spain and brought to America. I apologize for the confusion, AI says. While it is true that there were some cases of Spanish people being enslaved and brought to the Americas during the colonial period, it was not a common or widely accepted practice, especially not by the Spanish authorities themselves. Most of the enslaved Africans brought to the Americas were captured and sold by other Africans. See the bullshit? And European slave traders played a significant role in the transatlantic slave trade. While there may have been incidents of Spanish people being enslaved, I didn't ask about Spanish people, I asked about Spanish Jews. You see, the whole conversation was about the Israelites. Now it's trying to deviate to the actual Spanish people from Spain. That's not what I'm asking. It's trying to deviate to misinterpret what I'm saying when I was clear on what I was saying. While there may have been incidents of Spanish people being enslaved and brought to the Americas, these would have been isolated cases and not representative of the overall pattern of enslavement during the period. The Morisco and Moreno enslaved by Spain. Are they black Jews, yes or no? What's their response? The term Morisco and Moreno refer to different groups of people. Morisco refers to Muslims in Spain who were forced to convert to Christianity after the Reconquista of Spain in the late 15th century. The Moriscos faced persecution and discrimination from the Spanish authorities, and many were expelled from Spain in the early 17th century. Moreno is a Spanish word that means dark-skinned or of African descent. While some people with African ancestry may have been enslaved by the Spanish, this does not necessarily mean that they were Jewish or of Jewish descent. It is important to note that while there were Jewish people living in Spain during the colonial period, the majority of them were expelled from Spain in 1492, before the colonial era began. Some Jews may have converted to Christianity to avoid persecution, but they would not have been referred to as Moriscos. So now look at the lie. Everyone knows in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. While they were establishing colonization was the same time period that they were kicking out Jews out of Spain and Portugal the Iberian Peninsula, and the Spanish crown, the Portuguese crown, and the Catholic Church authorized slavery. The same time period. Let's continue. To summarize, while there are different groups of people who faced discrimination and enslavement by the Spanish during the colonial period, it is not accurate to conflate the terms Morisco and Moreno, or to assume that all enslaved people of African or Jewish descent were referred to by these terms. So my question was, what group of people was exiled from Spain, sent to West Africa, and then enslaved during colonialism and expansion? ? What group, listen to the question, what group of people was exiled from Spain, sent to West Africa, and then enslaved during colonialism and expansion? Answer: during the 16th century, Spain banished many Sephardic Jews. During the 16th century, Spain banished many Sephardic Jews, Jews of Spanish and Portuguese origin, from the Iberian Peninsula. These Jews, who later became known as New Christians, Portuguese Jews, or crypto Jews, were required to convert to Catholicism or leave Spain and Portugal. Many of them eventually settled in other parts of Europe, as well as in the Ottoman Empire and North Africa. Some also traveled to the Americas, but because they were still viewed with suspicion and persecution, they often kept their, quote, Jewish heritage hidden. It is possible that some Sephardic Jews were settled in West Africa during this time, may have been enslaved. Although this would have been due to practices of other European powers or African leaders, rather than those of Spain itself. Now watch this. I asked another AI similar questions, and let's see what the response was. I went to Ask AI, and I asked a similar question. So I'm going to go to the history to show you what I asked it. I asked, list books that give the relationship between blacks and ancient Israelites. It gave me several books that gave relationships, like Babylon and Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor, The Negro Question by Lee Cummings, Black Biblical Heritage by John L. Johnson, Hebrew Impact on Western Civilization by Dagobert D. Ruins, The Black Presence in the Bible, Discovering the Black and African Identity of Biblical Persons and Nations by Walter A. McCrae, The African Presence in Early Asia by Ivan van Sertima, African Origins of Major Western Religions by Yosef A. Ben Jochanan. These books offer different perspectives and interpretations of the relationships between blacks and ancient Israelites, and may be interest to those seeking to learn more about this topic. I asked the question again. What is the relationship between the transatlantic slave and the Inquisition? There is a complex relationship between the transatlantic slave trade and the Inquisition, but the two are not directly related. The transatlantic slave trade was a system of forced labor that forcibly transported millions of Africans across the Atlantic to the Americas to work in plantations and mines. It was driven by European economic interests and facilitated by the development of European seafaring technology. The Inquisition, on the other hand, was a system of religious and political persecution that was established by the Catholic Church in the late Middle Ages to combat heresy and maintain orthodoxy. It operated primarily in Europe and later in the Americas, but its primary focus was on Christians who were deemed to deviate from the Catholic doctrine. While the Inquisition did not directly contribute to the transatlantic slave trade, that's a lie, it did play a role in shaping the attitudes and beliefs of Europeans towards non-European peoples, including Africans. The Inquisition was responsible for promoting and enforcing the doctrine of Christian superiority, which is white delusionalism, and the ideas of civilizing mission that was used to justify European colonialism and imperialism. These ideas in turn helped to justify the enslavement and exploitation of African peoples during the transatlantic slave trade. Additionally, some enslaved Africans who were brought to the Americas were forced to convert to Christianity. This is how you became a Christian. Under the threat of punishment or death, the Inquisition played a role in the enforcement of Catholicism in the Americas, including among enslaved Africans and their descendants. Overall, while the transatlantic slave trade and the Inquisition were not directly related, that's a lie, they were both products of the same historical period, and were shaped by the same cultural and ideological forces that shaped European colonialism and imperialism. So now I asked a deviating question related to the same question, because my first question was about the Inquisition. Now I asked the question, what was the relationship between the papal bulls and the transatlantic slave trade? This is the crux of the matter. This is how I caught AI in a lie. Watch this.